On the 12th of July, 3 boats with no one aboard crossed the last stretch of water to the Iranian naval base at Bandar Abbas and did not slow down. No crew, no pilot steering them from a screen. They ran themselves straight onto a docked Iranian submarine and detonated. It was the first time in its history the United States Navy had ever sent a sea drone in to attack, and it was not a stunt for the cameras. Because a few hours later, in the same dark water, a 1,000-foot supertanker slipped its mooring with every light killed and its transponder silent, and walked straight out of the Strait of Hormuz, the most watched sea on Earth, without a shot fired at it. It never made that run alone. 2 American carriers were working the dark somewhere over the horizon, and the tanker was moving under their cover the whole way, though it never saw them and never had to. Those 2 things are the same story. The drone boats went in first to break down the coast that hunts tankers. The tanker behind them left through the gap they opened. One machine spent itself clearing the threat. The other simply vanished through the hole it left. And that is the part worth stopping on. Iran owns that coast. It owns the mines, the missiles, the boats. Yet CENTCOM can stand up and say, flatly, that Iran does not control the Strait of Hormuz. And be right. Not because the Navy brought a bigger gun, because it took away the one thing every weapon on that coast depends on: the ability to see. This is Navy Decoded, and that is the claim we are going to test tonight. Stay to the end, and you will see how a waterway can belong to Iran on every map and still not be Iran's to close. So let us start with the oldest rule there is about a strait. For as long as anyone has fought over a narrow sea, control has meant one simple thing. If you could see a ship, you could stop it. Put guns on the shore, put mines in the water, put eyes on the cliffs, and anything that passed in front of those eyes was yours to take. Sight came first. The shooting was the easy part. That was the contract, and it held for centuries. The Strait of Hormuz is where that contract gets tested, because the geography does the enemy's work for him. At its narrowest, the strait is only about 21 nautical miles across, and the lane a supertanker is actually allowed to use is a channel just 2 nautical miles wide. A supertanker has to thread that slot at a crawl, on a course everyone already knows, with the Iranian coast looming close enough that the mountains fill the horizon. And Iran has spent decades turning that coast into a killing ground. Radar on the high ground, anti-ship missiles ranged onto the channel, fast attack boats holding in the coves, mines seeded across the seabed. Every ship that enters is already tracked, already ranged, already inside the envelope before it clears the first bend. Whoever controls that slot has a hand on the throat of every ship inside it. In early 2026, Iran reached for that throat. When the war with the United States and Israel broke open, the Revolutionary Guard declared the strait closed to American and Allied shipping, seeded the water with mines, and began firing on anything that tried to run it. Merchant traffic collapsed almost overnight. Within days, transits through the strait had fallen by roughly 90%, leaving hundreds of ships and their crews stranded inside the Gulf with nowhere safe to go. And Washington answered the old way. It called it Project Freedom, an open, flag-waving escort, warships riding beside the merchant ships in plain daylight, exactly the way it had always been done. And it barely lasted a day before it was shelved. The reasons were partly political, but the shape of the problem was simpler than any of them. A convoy that announces itself hands the enemy the one thing it needs most: a firing solution. You do not have to find a ship that is telling you where it is. Being seen had been the entire point once. In the tanker war of 1987, a visible escort was a visible threat, and the threat was enough to keep the enemy at arm's length. That logic no longer holds. Against missiles, drones, and small boats that can be steered by a live sensor feed, announcing yourself does not deter the enemy. It aims him. So the Navy stopped announcing. The transit that finally worked ran on the exact opposite instinct. Every light out, every signal killed. A doctrine turned 180 degrees. The old contract had just been used against the fleet that wrote it, so the fleet stopped honoring it. Now, the mines are a genuine problem, and they get solved with genuine work. We will come to how, because it took the Navy's mine-hunting ships grinding away at that water to open a lane at all. But clearing a path through the mines only gets a ship to the starting line. It does not decide the race. What decides the race is a mistake buried inside a single word. The word is control. We assume that owning the water is the same as seeing what crosses it. It is not. A strait is not controlled by whoever holds the sea beneath it. It is controlled by whoever holds the sight line across it. Iran still owns the water. The coast has not moved an inch. But the sight line is the one thing physics let the Navy take away. So that is exactly what the operation attacked. Not the water, the seeing. It did it 3 ways. Start with a tanker, because the first move is to erase it from every spectrum a human on the Iranian coast can search. Think of a lighthouse. Its entire job is to be seen. That is what a lighthouse is. Now imagine ordering that lighthouse to go completely dark. Every lamp out, every window blacked, the radio room silent. And then steer it through a reef by memory alone. Except here, the lighthouse is 1,000 feet of fully loaded steel, and the reef is a shipping lane 2 nautical miles wide with mines somewhere in it. That is the discipline. The ships get underway around 1 in the morning, when the human eye and the coastal watch post are weakest. Every light stays off for the entire 6 to 7 hour run. The automatic identification system, the beacon that, in peacetime, continuously tells the world a ship's name, heading, and exact position, gets switched off, so the vessel erases itself from the public map. The radio goes quiet, so no signal intercept station ashore can pin a transmission to a hull. And this is the trade at the heart of it. The ship strips away every signal that keeps it safe in peacetime. The lights the law requires, the beacon that lets other ships avoid it, the radio that answers a distress call. In exchange, it buys back the only thing that matters inside a war zone. It stops being a target anyone can find. It coordinates instead through an encrypted channel with the Navy's 5th Fleet, whispering its position every 30 minutes and going dark again between. But this only closes one set of eyes, and any engineer sees which one immediately. Going dark defeats the human eye on the cliff, the night vision watch post, the signal intercept station listening for a transmission. What it does not defeat is radar. A supertanker is one of the largest radar reflectors a human being has ever put to sea. You can cut every lamp on that hull, and it will still light up a radar screen like a struck match. So blacking out the ship was never going to be enough on its own. It handles the eyes that see light and hear signals. It does nothing about the eyes that see in radio waves, and those belong to the coast. So the radar becomes the next problem to solve, and there are only 2 ways to beat it. You take the radar away from the enemy, or you put something between the radar and the ship. The operation did both. That is what the next 2 moves are, and neither of them is aimed at the tanker at all. So the second move is to blind the coast. And the machine that does the blinding is a pair of nuclear-powered airfields sitting off the coast, flying in the dark. The USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS George H.W. Bush ran flight operations around the clock through the whole fight for the strait, day and night, without pause, one of them holding station for many months on end to do it. Between them, they kept stealth fighters, radar planes, and electronic attack jets in the air over the Gulf the entire time. The point is not the roster. The point is that everything on those decks is built to work when no one can see. And this is where the whole story lives in a single detail, because those aircraft launch and land in the same darkness the tanker is hiding in. But watch what the darkness means to each side. A pilot coming home to that carrier in total darkness cannot see the ship at all. He does not need to. Radar brings him in from miles out, and an encrypted landing system flies him down onto a moving deck he never lays eyes on until his hook catches the wire. His eyes were replaced by sensors that do not care whether the sun is up, so the darkness is not an obstacle to him. It is just the room he works in. Now put the watch on the Iranian shore into that same dark, and the whole war shows up in the gap. He has his own eyes and whatever radar survived the last strike, a picture that is human, intermittent, and forever being knocked offline. The pilot traded his eyes for an instrument. The coast has only the eyes it was born with, and those do not reach across a blacked-out sea. One night, 2 kinds of sight. And because that carrier can see in the dark, it can fly off it and take the enemy's sight away. When Iran fired on ships running the southern route, the answer came fast and heavy. Dozens of targets struck across the Iranian coast in a single stretch. Radar sites, missile batteries, fast attack boats destroyed at their own piers. And every time Iran raised a new radar out of the rubble, it came down again. A second time, a third, before it could finish a single sweep. Overhead, Growler jets jammed the coastal air defense network, smearing the range finding that a shore missile needs to aim. This was not a battle for the strait, it was a battle for the right to see across it. But a carrier can only strike what its aircraft can reach, and Iran's most dangerous assets sit where aircraft are least welcome. Tucked deep inside a defended harbor, ringed by shore missiles built to swat down anything that flies in. That is the box the Corsair strike opened. Sending a piloted jet or a crewed boat into that ring means putting a human life inside the enemy's best defended ground. A drone with no one aboard changes the arithmetic. It is cheap, it is expendable, and the Navy can push it straight into the place the air defenses are thickest and simply spend it. And a naval base is not just any target, it is where the coast's whole picture is run from, the piers and the patrol craft that go out to hunt a tanker by eye once the radar has been knocked down. The carrier blinds the coast from above. The drone boat reaches in and takes out the room the coast does its seeing from. Which is the real reason that strike mattered, and why it opened this video. It was never about the headline of a first. It cleared the very stretch of coast a blacked-out tanker was about to run past, the escort that never rides beside the ship, because it goes in ahead of the transit and does not come back. That brings us to the piece of geometry that decides who wins that fight. Because sight is not just about who has the better sensor, it is about who stands where. And the physics of a coastline decides who can see whom. There are two ways through the strait: a northern corridor hugging Iran's own coast under Tehran's guns, and a southern corridor about 12 nautical miles wide, pressed tight against the coast of Oman. That choice is not about distance. Oman's waters are the one stretch of the strait outside Tehran's direct reach. Harder for Iran to mine, harder to saturate with fast attack boats, though never truly safe. Iran still reached across that line and struck ships running the southern route, and more than one tanker turned back in the night after the ones ahead of it were hit. The southern corridor lowers the odds against you, it does not zero them. And running close along the Omani cliffs does one more thing. The land itself blocks the radar. A tanker tucked against the rock disappears into the terrain behind it, and a coastal radar trying to pick it out is fighting its own reflections. But hard to mine is not the same as clear. Iran seeded that water, and the mines had to come out before a single loaded tanker could run it. Slow, unglamorous work done by the Navy's mine hunters out of Bahrain, pushing unmanned boats and helicopters ahead of the crewed ship to find and kill the mines without a sailor ever going near them. It is a physical threat with a physical answer, and once the lane is open, the fight moves off the water and back into the only question that ever really mattered: who can see across it? This is the physics at the center of everything. A radar on the shore can only see as far as its own horizon, and terrain in the way steals even that. But put the sensor up high, a Hawkeye radar plane or a surveillance drone flying above 50,000 feet, a $250 million machine that never fires a shot and only ever watches, and you push that horizon out for hundreds of miles. From up there, you look down onto the low, hidden targets the shore radar can never reach, and you hand that picture to a destroyer's missiles so the warship never has to switch on its own radar and give away where it is. High ground has always owned the sight line. The Navy simply moved its high ground into the sky. And Iran understood exactly what was being taken, because it fought back on the very same battlefield: the seeing. This was never a one-sided fight. Its clearest move was aimed straight at the tanker's own eyes. It flooded the strait with false satellite signals, spoofing, until ships watched their own position leap across the map, sliding miles inland on the display while they sat still in the water. In a channel 2 nautical miles wide, losing your position is not an inconvenience. It is a collision waiting to happen. So the crews were forced backward in time. They shut off the digital navigation they no longer trusted and went back to the oldest tools on the bridge: the magnetic compass, dead reckoning by hand, bearings drawn in pencil on a paper chart. The satellite age folded itself back into an age of rulers and dividers, because in that strait, the sight line was under attack from both directions at once. So the choice of the southern corridor, the aircraft overhead, the sensor pushed up into the sky, none of it was about guarding the ship. It was about controlling who is allowed to see what at every range. See far from above, deny the enemy his picture below, and slip the ship through the blind spot that opens up. One continuous chain, and every link is about vision. So step back and ask the question the whole thing was built to answer. Iran has the geography, it has the mines, it has the missiles, and it has the coast. So how can CENTCOM stand up and say, plainly, that Iran does not control the strait? Because the separate pieces were never really separate. They are one equation written over and over. Controlling a strait was never about owning the water. It is about owning the distance between the moment you detect a ship and the moment you can fire on it. Shrink that distance to zero and you rule the strait. Stretch it toward infinity and you own nothing. That is the whole operation in one line. It stretched Iran's detection distance out past the point where the math still works. And a weapon that cannot find its target is not a weapon anymore. It is a guess, fired into probable emptiness. Even the drone strike at Bandar Abbas fits the same equation. 3 cheap boats spent to shorten Iran's reach by a few more miles of coast, one more slice taken off the distance at which it can still see. Every mine, every missile, every boat still exists. Not one of them was taken away. They were simply cut off from the one thing that made them lethal, a target they could actually see. A blockade that cannot see well enough to aim is barely a blockade at all. It is a coastline full of weapons and a sea too dark to point them at, which turns the tanker's disappearing act into something larger than survival. Go back to that 1,000-foot ship going dark at 1 in the morning. It looks like hiding, a ship afraid, trying to sneak past. It is not. That vanishing is not the tanker protecting itself. It is the United States reaching into Iran's hands and taking the strait back. The ship does not go invisible to escape the blockade. It goes invisible to prove there isn't one. Its silence is the sovereignty claim. Every dark hull that slips through is CENTCOM's sentence made physical. Iran does not control the strait, because control was never the water. It was the sight line across it. So come back to 1 in the morning, to that 1,000 feet of loaded tanker, every light out, sliding into the black. Somewhere ahead of it that night, a handful of uncrewed boats had already spent themselves against the coast, clearing the hunters out of the water so this moment could happen quietly. Now the tanker reaches open water on the far side exactly the way it left, silent, unlit, and on no screen that was hunting for it. Overhead, a fighter settles onto a deck it cannot see, guided down by sensors that never needed the sun. And a coastline full of Iranian mines and missiles and boats watches a dark sea and finds nothing on it to shoot. The water is Iran's. The mines are Iran's. The sightline is not. Control was never about who owned the sea. It was about who could see across it. And that was the one thing physics let the Navy take away. One narrow corridor, one dark hull, one equation. No eyes, no control. A blockade, in the end, is just a machine for seeing. And a machine can be taken apart. You find the single bolt holding it together, and you watch what happens the moment it is pulled. That is the work we do here at Navy Decoded. So the next time a headline tells you a waterway is closed, you will already know which question to ask. Not who holds the water, but who holds the sight line above it. Stay with us, and we will keep pulling the bolt.